All right, I will start us off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Green Living Workshop, our first of the year. So we're very excited about that. My name is Taylor, and I am the project assistant with the town of Okotoks. And tonight we are joined by Grace from Green Calgary. And I'm very excited to hear her talk called Sustainable Table. So as always with our Green Living workshops, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can feel free to use that Q&A function that you can find on the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will try to get to all of those questions by the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Grace to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Taylor. All right, let me just share my screen here. Perfect. All right, can you see everything okay?
Looks great. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this session. As Taylor said, my name is Grace. I am an educator and the Green Workplace Coordinator at Green Calgary. And today I'm going to be talking to you about food. So we're going to be familiarizing ourselves with the food that's in our grocery stores, how it got there, how it finds its way onto our dinner plates. And I'm going to be providing you with some tips on how you can introduce sustainability into your weekly meal planning. All right, so first off, just a little bit about Green Calgary. So since 1978, we've been a leading local urban environmental charity serving the city of Calgary and area, where our goal is to empower Calgarians to lead more sustainable lives, both for ourselves and for the environment. And we do this through a number of different programs that we have. So we have programs for green kids, so educational programs for school-aged children, for Green Workplace, some of the programs that I lead, which are resources and supports to assist local businesses with their sustainability initiatives. And then we also have green homes and communities, sessions like the one that I'm leading tonight, where we actually get the opportunity to get into a community and talk to its residents about the sustainability issues that matter to you, and hopefully bring you a little more information and a few more resources on how you can do that. So let's get into it. I did want to start off with a few fast facts to just get us warmed up here. And so this is probably going to look a little bit different than when we do this session in person, where normally I would get you to shout out the answers. But because we're still in the Zoom world today, if you just want to imagine the answer to yourself, or maybe type it into the chat box, that would be a great way to participate. So I'm going to read you out the question. The first one here is, around the world, what percentage of our world population do you think works in agriculture? Do you think it's 10%, 27%, 40%, or 63%? Let's see some answers coming into the chat here. All right, wonderful. And so I'll just give you one more moment here. And the answer is, in fact, 27%. All right, so for most of history, agriculture has been the largest employer in the world, and this just makes sense because we need food to survive. We need food to grow our population centers, although we have actually been seeing a decline in this number over time. So over the past 20 years, in the early 2000s, about 40% of the world population was employed in agriculture, and that's kind of gone down to 27% over the years, largely because people are shifting more towards a service sector, but also because of rising productivity from our farms. So farms are getting a lot better at making a lot more food with less labor. Okay, so next question. True or false? Do you think that organic farming requires 2.5 times more labor than conventional farming? And I'll just give you another moment here. Do you think this is true, or do you think that this is false? All right, so the answer is, this is true. So organic farming actually does require a lot more additional labor, and this is to manage weeds and pests. But this is also at reduced exposure risk for employees to synthetic pesticides and herbicides because they simply aren't using them on organic farms. Okay, next question. So since the 1900s, what percent of crop diversity has been lost in farming? So by this, I mean the total genetic diversity of the seeds that we're actually planting in the ground, that we're using on our farms. How much diversity do you think we've lost in the past 120 years? Is it 5%, 20%, 50%, or 75%? And I'll just give you a moment there. All right, so the answer to this one, unfortunately, is 75%. So we've lost 3/4 of our crop diversity over time as farmers have gradually replaced the use of local varieties of seeds with seeds that are maybe more high yielding or a lot more genetically uniform. So we're seeing a lot less diversity in the produce that's coming out of our farms. Okay, next question. What percent of foods in Canada have tested positive for glyphosate residue? And just for your information, glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, which is one of the most common weed killers in the world. So do you think it's none, 10%, 20%, or 30%? All right. And the answer to this one is 30%, so just under a third of produce samples that have been tested by the Canada Food Inspection Agency do have glyphosate residues on them. Although fortunately, 98.7% of these samples are below the maximum limit that's set by Health Canada. But that means that there is still a small percent that do have that above that limit, as well as, there are still trace residues there of glyphosate in our food samples. Okay, just a couple more quick questions here for you. So true or false, all organic food logos are regulated by governing bodies. What do you think? Anytime you come across a logo in the food market that says organic or natural, do you think that it comes from a governing body? All right, I see the answers are coming in. This, everyone is correct. This is a false statement. So not all food logos are legitimate. Not all of them have to be governed when they're going onto our different products in the grocery store. And this is resulting in a lot of greenwashing, where consumers may think that they're buying a product that's more sustainable, but it could have had maybe mixed methods in terms of how it was produced. Okay, one final question for you. This one might be a bit of an easy one. I heard that through this program, we're a big fan of bees, but true or false, bees contribute an estimated $2 billion annually to crop production. What do you think? Is this true or is this false? All right, lovely. True. I see Tamara's point there, true or more. So this is absolutely true. It's well recognized the positive impacts that bees have on not just our crop systems, but keeping our ecosystems healthy, keeping our world healthy. And unfortunately, pollinators like bees and other insect species are seeing pretty massive declines. They are currently under threat for a number of reasons. And we're seeing increased instances of what we call colony collapse disorder, where large populations of bees are disappearing or they're dying out for various reasons. Okay, so that brings me to the end of our quick facts session. So now that we're more warmed up, let's start to talk about industrial food systems. So these are the systems that provide the vast majority of food that's supplied through our grocery stores, and they likely make up at least a portion of our diets. And so it's helpful to know what some characteristics are of industrial food systems and some of the risks that they can pose to environmental and to human health. So the first type of industrial food system that I wanted to talk about is monocultures. This is probably a word you've heard before, and a monoculture, by definition, is when a single crop is grown repeatedly on the same piece of land. So these could be crops like corn, like wheat, or soy, which we call commodity crops because they're grown in really large volumes and at really high intensity. And we grow them this much because they go into absolutely everything. And over the years, monocultures have made really heavy use of large amounts of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. And along with this, they oftentimes use genetically modified seeds as well, ones which are maybe more resistant to pesticides and herbicides so that they can grow lots of crops very quickly. And so some of the associated side effects of growing monocultures is they have a pretty heavy environmental footprint. They can have an impact on our biodiversity because by definition, a monoculture is really only using one type of seed, but it can also impact the biodiversity in the surrounding area. When we use more synthetic fertilizers or pesticides or herbicides, it can result in soil degradation where we're drawing out nutrients from the soil. We can also have pollution into the surrounding surface water or into the soil. And there's also an associated carbon footprint that comes with large monoculture farming operations because of the necessary machinery that's there in order to till the soil, in order to seed, and in order to harvest crops. So although it wasn't an industrial monoculture, the Irish potato famine is one example that shows the risks associated with relying on a single plant species. So what happened here is with potatoes, where they reproduce vegetatively, meaning they don't reproduce by seeds, but if you've seen a potato tuber, it will sprout out its roots, it will grow more potatoes. And because of this, most of the potatoes that were grown in Ireland in the 1830s and in the 1840s had identical genetics. So the species that was grown quite widely was the Irish lumper, and it also happened to be very susceptible to a particular type of fungus called late blight. And at this time, potatoes had become the primary food source for a large part of the population in Ireland, primarily poor populations. And when this disease finally was introduced to the region, massive crop failures just became an inevitability. So nearly the entire potato crop in all of Ireland was wiped out by this fungus, the late blight. It devastated potato crops throughout the region, and many people starved, and it resulted in a pretty catastrophic population decline in Ireland, so about 1.5 million people over 10 years. So this just is an example of how when we rely on very genetically limited, very genetically uniform species, it can have risks like this where we can wipe out large portions of our crops in a very small amount of time. The next type of industrial food system that I want to talk about are called animal feeding operations. So the EPA defines an animal feeding operation as any agricultural enterprise where animals are kept and raised in a confined space for 45 days or more. So what happens here is we're typically bringing the feed to the cattle. They're kept in a really small area. And what also happens with this is it usually is confined, the entire operation is on a really small amount of land. And some of the risks that are associated with this is if we don't manage, the wastewater and the manure that's coming out of this operation effectively, it can also lead to a really heavy amount of pollution of our surface water with nitrogen and phosphorus, which can lead to algal blooms in the surrounding area and choke out aquatic habitats, with organic matter and sediment, pathogens, hormones, and antibiotics. And so the impacts of these operations on the area around it can be pretty heavy. There's also a pretty heavy carbon footprint associated with feeding operations like these as well, not just limited to the transportation of the cattle themselves, but an individual cow is capable of producing 220 pounds of methane per year. The next type of industrial food system I'll talk about is commercial fishing. So it's becoming more and more well known that overfishing is one of the greatest threats to our ocean today that's being compounded as well by major environmental disasters like climate change and like plastic pollution. And so the world's marine life is quickly being depleted, unfortunately, and it's estimated that 90% of all large predatory fish are already gone from our world's oceans. So some of the practices that are associated with commercial fishing, like bottom trawling, can actually cause a lot of habitat damage. And this is where, we're dragging a really large net across the ocean floor and trying to catch, a school of fish. And what can happen with this is, not only are we disturbing that habitat, but they're also catching an estimated 40% of what's called bycatch or unintended catch. So these can be fish that are unmarketable, maybe they're too small, can also pick up endangered species. And the unfortunate thing with bycatch is that oftentimes the fish that are tossed back, they often don't survive. And so I'm going to have a few tips for you later in the presentation on how to recognize sustainable and unsustainable commercial fishing when you're in a grocery store. All right, another measure of industrial food systems that I want to talk about is food miles. So how can we measure the impact of our food? And one of the ways to do this is with how far it's traveled. So on average, our food comes from 1,200 kilometers away to get from producer to table. So the concerns with this are most obviously the fossil fuels that are used to transport these foods that could otherwise be grown locally. The pollution and the carbon emissions that are associated with this that are also contributing back to climate change. And then also the reliance on imports can reduce our local food security. Maybe if we're relying a lot more on foods that are coming further distances and not putting that investment into our local economies and into our local food systems. And we're seeing, a similar issue like this today. Some of our grocery stores lately are looking a little bit more barren with the issues that we're currently having in supply chain. And so times like these, it's good to have a really healthy local food economy that we can rely on to get everything we need. So with food miles, just a few examples here for you. So those greens and fruits that come from California, they can travel up to 2,500 kilometers to get to our grocery stores. Asparagus and pears that come from Peru are coming 7,600 kilometers. Garlic and oranges from China are coming 9,500 kilometers. And some citrus fruits, if you ever see on the little tag that if they come from South Africa, they can be coming from over 15,000 kilometers away, which is pretty substantial. And it's a distance that often is easy to forget about when we're just grabbing our produce in the grocery store. So fortunately, there's a way for us to be able to recognize and think about these food miles. So by law, our supermarkets are required to tell consumers where our fruits and veggies are coming from. So you can see that, the apple that you've bought came from Chile, or the portobello mushroom that came from the United States. And luckily, in more and more of our grocery stores, we're also having these local labels, these local signage that's popping up. So you can say, oh, great, this lettuce was grown in BC, or you can find even a lot of Alberta grown fruits and veggies that are in our grocery store aisles. So one last note on industrial food systems is something that I've kept bringing up through my slides, but that's just on pesticides. So strawberry that's been tested by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, they found in a study that it had on average 5.75 different types of pesticides per sample compared to other produce, which were closer to, I think, 1.7 different pesticides. And so what's good for us to just be aware of here is that there are other kind of unseen factors that are coming in with when we're buying an item. What we see on the ingredient label, or even with produce, you're just buying a strawberry, but it may also be associated with various exposures that we don't totally see. And so this is, having an awareness of this is summarized really well in this quote, that the more knowledge people have about the way their food is produced, the more likely it is that their values and not just their value will inform their purchasing decisions. So by this, I'm just saying that each consumer absolutely has a choice in what you're buying, and our buying patterns can absolutely influence markets of supply and demand. We're seeing a lot more organic options than we did before, or stores that are popping up where we can buy in bulk or bring our own containers. And so our buying habits can absolutely make a shift, and we can make it known what the types of products that we want to see are in our grocery stores. So now that we've discussed industrial food systems, how do our sustainable food systems compare? And I'll just start off with a simple definition here about sustainable agriculture. So it's a production system that's good for the environment and for people, that's humane to animals and to food and farm workers, and that supports a thriving rural and urban communities at the same time. So I really love this definition because it captures that through sustainable food systems, we're not only being ecologically responsible, but we're also supporting local and helping to keep ourselves healthy at the same time. And there are a few simple ways that you can start to integrate this into your daily or your weekly meal planning. And that's to buy local, buy organic, to grow your food yourself, and to prevent food waste. So first off, buying local. The absolute best way to do this is by finding your local farmers markets. So in going to your local farmers market, you actually have that opportunity to talk to the farmers. You can talk to the person who grew the carrots, who raised the chicken, baked the bread, made the jam for you, or knit your sweater. And there's this really great app for farmers markets through the Alberta approved farmers markets system, where they can help you find all of the local markets that are nearby. And many of them also apply what's called the 80-20 rule, where 80% of all of the vendors who are there have to apply the make it, bake it, or grow it rule. And the other 20% are vendors who are selling products that complement that mix. So absolutely the best way to find local produce that can also be more sustainable for our environment is to get to your local farmers market. But what can we do when it's the middle of winter like it is right now, and our outdoor farmers markets are closed for the season? It can be a little more difficult to link up with our local producers in that way. And what you can do is link up with a community-supported agriculture program, also called a CSA. So through CSAs, you can support a local family farm. You can get some really high-quality, nutrient-dense foods, and you can also help to improve local food security. So how this works is you can purchase a seasonal share or a half share in the summer. In the winter, you can get all your great seasonal summer veggies and fruits. And then many CSAs also offer other products like baked breads or preserves, eggs, flours, meats, and fish. And so you can see that on the picture on the bottom right-hand side, a lot of restaurants, local restaurants, will also link up with CSAs. So when you're ordering from their menu and you see something like YYC Growers radishes, you can help make an informed choice and help to support local through your restaurants as well. A similar concept has also been applied through community-supported fisheries. Although in Alberta, not a lot of fisheries around here. However, if you hop over the border to BC, I think there's a lot more CSF programs there as well that you can take part in. So another option, in addition to our community-supported agriculture and our farmers markets, is also to buy local through various natural food stores or through U-Pick farms. So in Calgary, and I believe in Okotoks as well, there are abundant natural food stores that come really well stocked, oftentimes with organic or local options. And U-Pick is also a super fun option. There are a number of farms that are around our area where you can link up with them in the summer or in the fall and go out and pick local berries and local apples. And it can be a fun family activity where you can bring it home and store them and remember that memory that you made while you were also supporting local agriculture. Okay, so I've been talking about organic foods a lot, but I do want to put a bit more of a definition to it. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture defines organic crops as crops that are produced on a farm that don't have or that have not used synthetic pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizer in the past 3 years before harvesting the food. And then in addition to this, they also need to have a significant buffer around that farm in order to decrease contamination from adjacent farmlands. And in Canada, all of organic foods are regulated by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So some of the benefits of organic food are, first, that it can be healthier for our surrounding local environments that the food is grown in. And it's also more labor intensive, like we talked about during the Fast Facts, which can help to promote a local economy. But it also means that our organic foods are more expensive, and this is why. And lastly, eating organic food, it may not provide any more extra nutrients for you, but will also limit your exposure to those pesticide residues that we were talking about. So in reducing our exposure to pesticides by consuming organics, we're also reducing our long-term exposure to those pesticides that can be linked to various health risks. So increased risk of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, to prostate, ovarian, and other cancers, to depression and other respiratory problems. And the long-term exposure to pesticide residues on our fruits and veggies is still uncertain, because it's in really small quantities. It's something that studies are still being done on. But the majority of these risks that you're seeing on the slide here are associated with farm workers who have had, more long-term exposure in higher volumes. So how do we actually choose organic? We talked about how a lot of organic logos aren't actually regulated, and we have to be wary when we're in the grocery store of seeing products that say things like all natural or green. And I'll actually have an app for you a little bit later in the presentations to sort of help you sleuth out some of those claims and that information that you're getting in the grocery store. But of all the logos that we see, these two are the most credible. So first is the USDA organic and USDA 100% organic logo. And then in Canada, we have the Canada organic logo, where the use of this logo, it's voluntary, and it has to have at least 95% organic content or more, and have been certified according to the Canadian requirements for organic products. So a similar system also applies to imported organic products in Canada, where they also have to meet these same requirements. And if an import has an Organic Canada logo on it, it also has to have labeling really nearby to say where it's been imported from, so you can start to factor in those food miles for yourself as well. So how do we choose sustainable when it comes to seafoods? Well, there are a number of logos and certifications that are associated with this as well. We have OceanWise, we have the Marine Stewardship Council, and Sea Choice, which you can look out for when you're in the grocery store, where OceanWise recommended species are ones that are abundant and resilient to fishing pressures. So we're selecting fish stocks that we know can support harvesting over time. They also need to be well managed with a comprehensive management plan based on current research. So we're actually doing some very deliberate planning here on how to support these populations. And they need to be harvested in a method that ensures limited bycatch on those non-target species, on endangered species. So we're not impacting those species that are existing in the same or similar habitats. And then they're also being harvested in ways that limit that damage to marine or aquatic habitats and negative interactions with other species. So we're building in a number of other factors here in order to be really deliberate about how we're harvesting fish and helping to support our oceans, which are becoming incredibly stressed at the moment from all of these different environmental factors. Okay, so organic beef and dairy. So I'll give you first a definition for organic beef, which is that it's pasture-raised and provided with organic feed, that it's raised without antibiotics or hormones, that it has approved feed ingredients at levels that are greater than or adequate nutrition for health for the cattle, and that natural methods are used for breeding. So you can find local Alberta beef through your local butcher shop, and you can also link up with a local ranch. That's something that's great to do. We have a ton of great ones in our area, and the best way to learn about the food that you're eating, as I said before, is to talk to the people that are producing it. And then you can also keep an eye on the tags for local Alberta beef in your grocery store. And one benefit, too, that I wanted to mention about organic beef and about pasture-raised beef is that, with effective management, our cattle grazing on grasslands can actually help to support a healthy native grassland. And what I mean by this is that, for millennia here in Alberta, we used to have bison that were roaming the grasslands and occupying this very specific environmental niche. And that has since been a niche that has been filled by cattle. And so they're helping to keep our grasslands healthy, which is also at the same time helping to store a lot of carbon in the roots and in the vegetation that's associated with these grasslands. So that's an absolute benefit. Okay, so organic chickens and eggs. So organic chickens tend to have a very similar definition to organic beef, where they're raised organically no later than 2 days after they hatch. They're fed organic feed that's non-GMO, that doesn't have any animal byproduct. They're also not using any pesticides or chemical fertilizers or antibiotics, and they have outdoor access as well. And similar to finding organic beef or finding organic produce, the best way to find organic eggs, again, is through your farmers markets, through your CSA, or finding someone local who has hens in their backyard. That's something that is starting to become more common and is actually allowed now in certain parts of Calgary. I think this is something that's just starting to happen here. And one thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to organic chickens and eggs is also our egg labeling. So when you go in the grocery store, you're probably seeing like a long laundry list of all the different types of labels that we have on our egg cartons, which can include organic, cage-free, free-range, all-natural, pasture-raised, vegetarian-fed, omega-3, and white-brown. So what do all of these labels mean? To unpack it a little bit. So organic, I already talked about in the last slide. They're eggs that are certified as organic, their feed is organic, and they also have access to outside. So it's usually a good sign when you can see this labeling because it's actually the only one in this entire list that is actually regulated. When we're talking about cage-free, it means chickens that were uncaged and able to roam freely around a barn or a facility, but they generally don't have access to the outdoors. And then when we talk about free range, it indicates that the hens are cage-free, they have some access to the outdoors, but the type and the duration of outdoor access that they have isn't totally clear. It can vary, and it could just consist of maybe having a screened porch. Then there's all natural. So all natural can mean just about anything that the egg producer wants. The USDA considers that all shell eggs are natural and doesn't really set a standard for the hen's living conditions. So this, again, can mean just about anything. And then there's pasture raised. So this indicates that hens were actually raised outdoors on a pasture where they can get out and roam and forage. And so this is often a good sign. Grass-fed can typically mean the same thing as well. Vegetarian-fed means that hens only receive vegetarian feed. So they don't have any animal byproducts, but that it can also sometimes indicate with that label that they don't have any outdoor access because chickens, they're naturally omnivores, meaning that if they were outside, they would have access to various grubs and worms and other bugs. And with the vegetarian fed label, this just may not be the case. With omega-3, it means that eggs contain extra omega-3 fatty acids, and this just means that the hens are being fed a diet that's really rich in, say, flax or fish oils. And lastly, white-brown eggs. The egg color is just based on the hen that's laying it, and so it actually doesn't affect the quality or the nutrition of the egg itself. So hopefully that clears up a bit of the confusion around all of those different labels. So I wanted to talk about GMOs next. There's something that I've been mentioning throughout this presentation, and GMOs have also been sort of a contentious topic over the past maybe 20, 30 years or so. But GMOs just means genetically modified organisms. So these are they're seeds or they're species that have been altered inside a lab, not necessarily through selective breeding or through natural selection over time. And so it's a relatively new process since 1994, and it's estimated that 70 to 75% of all of our grocery store products have at least one genetically modified ingredient in them. And one factor about GMOs is that they're treated often so that they can tolerate more pesticides and herbicides. And so what are some of the concerns that are associated with GMOs, especially when it comes to our environmental health? So I talked about monocultures before, just this loss of biodiversity, where say with our soy, our corn, our sugar and beet crops, we're seeing probably 75 to 95% of them are now made up of GMO seeds. And so this means that we're really losing that genetic diversity that we have within our crops, which could down the road perhaps lead to more issues and lead to issues with local biodiversity. With using GMO seeds that are more resilient against pesticides and herbicides, it means that in some cases that's leading the farms that are using these seeds to apply more pesticides and herbicides safely because it's not affecting their crops. And so that could lead to more pollution in the surrounding area and again, more impacts to local native species. And lastly, with GMOs, there just isn't any requirement for labeling for them. So when you're in the grocery store, there isn't really a way of finding out if our produce was grown from a GMO crop or not. So we can't make an informed decision as consumers about whether or not we want to buy them. Okay, take a quick moment here. We've been covering a lot of information, and I want to sort of bring this down again because I've been talking about these sort of big concepts in sustainability, but what does it mean to eat sustainably on an everyday basis and on a budget? Because buying organic for our entire meal may not be something that's financially sustainable for us. So what can we do? Firstly, to eat simple and eat at home. You know, the more you eat at home, it can absolutely save costs, and meal planning can really go a long way with this. Make sure that you're eating in season. So I'll have on my next slide a quick chart showing all of the different seasonal fruits and veggies that you can find throughout the year here in Alberta. Next, introduce more meatless meals. So meatless Mondays are becoming something that's increasingly popular around the world. And by cutting down your meat just once a week, you can really slash your greenhouse gas emissions and the total environmental footprint of your meals. And you can also save quite a bit of money as well. And there are tons of great recipes out there. I know in my household, we're a big fan of integrating beans into probably 3 of our meals a week. You can also grow your own food. This, again, is a really great activity that you can do with your community and with your family. It's really gratifying also to be able to have your harvest at the end of the season and to be able to eat food that you've made yourself. You can also buy in bulk at your natural food stores. As I said before, there are a ton of really great options out there now for buying bulk in the area. Stores that will also allow you to bring in your own containers and have them weighed in advance so that you're not bringing any extra packaging home with you as well. And then another idea for you is to coordinate with friends or family to buy a CSA share together. So maybe that share that you're getting or half share that you're getting in the summer and the fall is just a bit too much for your household to be able to get through in a week. Definitely consider, linking up with others and splitting that food share. All right. So here are some of the seasonal fruits and veggies, as well as other products that you can find in Alberta throughout the year. And I won't stay on the slide too long, but I believe we are also having a recording of this, and I would be happy to share my slides afterwards so that you can just use this as a reference. But some examples of the seasonal foods that you can get in the spring or in the summer are things like asparagus, or you can get those beautiful leafy greens and have just a wonderful seasonal summer salad. And then in the fall, I know that I really rely on all of those really wonderful root vegetables to make lots of hearty soups and also feel good about eating produce that's local to my area. Okay, some more tips on finding a balance with conventional produce. So when you're going into the grocery store, there are also produce items that we can be aware of, some that have more or more likely to have pesticide residues, and some that might be cleaner. So the greatest or easiest way to find this out is by looking up what's called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, the most and least likely produce to contain pesticide residues. And for the most, it's currently including produce like strawberries and spinach, kale and nectarines, apples and grapes. Some real fan favorites, especially in my household, that we need to be aware of in order to avoid those pesticide residues. And then you can also look for that Clean 15. So if you go to ewg.org, they have the full list for these. So you can start to consider that and integrate it into your weekly meal planning. So another factor about just considering our conventional produce is that it can be unrealistic for us to research every item that's on our shopping list. It can be really, really time consuming. And so one thing that you can do is just have one chosen item a week that you research. Maybe this week you research your avocado and think about its environmental footprint or how far it comes from and how you want to integrate that into your menu. And then next week you can choose a completely different item. So this way you can just sort of break things down into bite-sized pieces and set little environmental goals for yourself and build your knowledge over time. And then you can also get to know which brands and stores are more sustainable. So an example of this is through Co-op. They have the Best from the West label, which can really help you to quickly identify all of those local items and help to be able to support them. Now we're getting a little short on time here, so I'll go pretty quickly through just a little bit more information. But I did want to quickly mention this app. It's the Environmental Working Group app that you can use. It's actually got a little barcode on it, a barcode scanner, so that when you're in the grocery store and you have a product in front of you, it's got a long list of different ingredients and you don't know what half of them mean. You can actually use this to scan some of those, and the Environmental Working Group will actually give you a rating on it to say, here are the different pesticides and herbicides that are associated with this product. Or if you're looking at personal care products as well, it'll help you to break down all of the different chemical ingredients to have a bit of a better understanding of what those mean as well. Okay, just a few more quick tips here on how to participate in a sustainable food system, some of which I've mentioned already. Firstly, growing your own food, and if you have extra food at the end of the season, canning your food as well is a great way to hold over that harvest into the winter. Participate in a community garden. So in Calgary, there are more than 200 community gardens, and I was talking to the Okotoks team here as well. There are going to be some more opportunities coming up next year for creating new community gardens in Okotoks as well. And then there's also projects like the Calgary Harvest Project, where at the end of the growing season, they will actually go around the city and ensure that we're harvesting all of the apples and crab apples that are found on the trees and collecting all of that locally grown food and putting it into use in other ways and making it into ready-made products, sometimes like awesome local ciders. Okay, I just wanted to add another quick note on reducing food waste. So this is one of the easiest ways to integrate sustainability into your everyday meal planning. And it's just firstly by making a menu and only buying what you need. Using everything that you have, so taking stock of all of those items in your fridge and trying to make the most of it at the end of the week. Getting creative with your recipes to use up those leftover items, and also not shying away from those ugly veggies, because if you don't buy it, then who knows who will, and it may get thrown out by the grocery store at the end of the week. Also ensure that you're composting absolutely everything you can and using as little packaging as you can on all of your foods. So just have an awareness of which items are recyclable, which types of packaging are not, and trying to cut back and having low to no packaging on all of your products. All right, we're getting very short on time here. So the last note is just on saving your veggies. The average Canadian household throws out about $28 worth of food per week. And if you just take a moment to learn how to store each of those veggies properly, then we can also extend their lifespan and maybe get to use them a little bit longer instead of throwing them out at the end of the week. So the quick fact here is, did you know that cucumbers actually can't be stored within the fridge? Well, they can be stored within the fridge, but their life cycle will be a lot longer if they're stored outside of it. We can store lots of our leafy greens by wrapping them in a damp paper towel, and it will actually extend their life cycle for a lot longer. And here's a resource sheet for you here in case you wanted to take a screenshot of these different logos to look out for when you're in the grocery store. But I'm just going to wrap up here and say thank you very much for your attention. I know this was a lot of information on how to integrate sustainability into your meal planning, into your household. And what I just want to be clear about is that, it's always a journey for us to introduce new sustainability initiatives into our lives. It's something that you need to make sure, works for your family, works for your household, and make sure that you're just taking little steps at a time, setting targets for yourself throughout the year to say, okay, this is what I want to research for my meal planning. Here's how I want to reduce my waste at home. And every little action that you take can absolutely make a difference. So thank you again for attending this session, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
And thank you, Grace. That was great. I definitely got a lot from that. I'm going to be trying out some of those tips in the future here. So I have one question here, and if anyone does have any more questions, please feel free to add them into the Q&A, and I will go ahead and ask Grace them, and she will give us her best answers. So our first question from Tamara is, if organic meat and eggs don't use antibiotics, how do they treat infection and sickness?
Right. So that is a very good question, and I believe I have a bit of a complicated answer. So for, I believe, most consumable meats, they do really limit the amount of antibiotics that they're using. But in most cases, I think if there is, sorry, let me think about this for just a moment. I think the instances oftentimes on, say, organic farms of having infections, it can be quite a bit lower. But in some cases, I think they might allow the use of antibiotics for sick animals, but in limited quantities. I think they really try to limit it in most cases. But I'm sorry, Tamara, that I don't have a more straightforward answer for you. If you want to link up with me by email, I'd be happy to get a bit more information to you.
Awesome. Yeah, I know just from what I have heard, I believe you're correct with the they can use the antibiotics as needed. It's just not added to the feed,
yes.
To the animals. So, yes. Okay, maybe we'll wait a minute to see if anyone has any more questions to add. That was the only one I had in the Q&A. Let me check the chat real quick.
They're just absorbing all of the information.
That was a lot of information, but it was really great information. So that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, jam-packed hour.
For sure. Okay, well, if there isn't any more questions, I just wanted to say to everyone that we do host our Green Living workshops every month. You can find them on the Okotoks website as well as in your 2022 calendars. The dates have already been set, so keep an eye out for our next Green Living workshops and our ones throughout the year. And thank you again, Grace, for joining. Oh, I see a question. I'll stop right there. Okay, so from Bev, we have grass-fed free-range animals are not subject to the same degree of infection as our feedlot animals, so they can be removed from the herd to kept separate as well. Okay, so an answer to our other question. Thank you so much, Bev. Anyway, as I was saying, yes, thank you so much, Grace. That was super helpful. Some really good tips there. I think we can all take something away from that. And I'm raising my hand.
Wonderful, thank you.
And I had one more question, I believe it's for me, from Amanda. Are each of the events different and discuss different things? Yes, so we try and cover wide range of topics during our Green Living workshops. I can give a little heads up that our next one will be on a gardening topic. So for all the gardeners out there, I think you'll really like it. But with that, I want to say thank you to everyone that joined us today. And I hope you all have a great evening and a great rest of your week.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for hosting. This was wonderful.
Of course. Bye-bye, everyone.
All right. Take care.